As my phone goes off. Let me turn that off. I hope everyone is having a good night. We're going to let some people get in. And of course, I'm going to bring it up on my own Facebook so I don't miss any of the chat, like the one day where I miss chat. I don't like doing that, especially for today. So, for those of you joining on YouTube, Facebook, maybe it's your first time here because you just found me based on the protest streams. Hello. Today we're talking about 58. We are joined here by Stephanie. Stephanie is a lawyer. And we're going to let her kind of explain all that stuff to you, who she is and stuff like that. So I guess without further ado, Stephanie, or I should explain to you guys, Stephanie was my lawyer when I got arrested. She is fantastic, and she is 10 times smarter than I will ever be. So let's get into this. I'm going to put the camera on her for most of the night because you guys know what I look like. All right. There we go.
Hello.
All right, so do you want to just explain to us what 50A is to start with?
I will. I'm going to.
Okay.
First, we're going to have a moment of silence for 50A because 50A is dead. Okay? So just, right? 50A is no more. All right, and 50A, and I've brought some research because it's been a long day, so I want to make sure I get my facts right. Very important. But Section 50A of the New York Civil Rights Law was adopted in 1976, the year my sister was born, 3 years after I was born. And so it's been around for a very long time, and it was created, I'm gonna read directly here, it created a special right of privacy for the personnel records used to evaluate performance toward continuing employment or promotion of police officers, correction officers, and firefighters/paramedics employed by the state or political subdivisions, which is, you know, a fancy way of saying a town, a village, a city, like Buffalo, right? Firefighters, paramedics, etc., as well as those peace officers working for the Department of Corrections and community supervision or local probation departments, right? So 50A started out, I guess, from a place of love, which with the idea being that, and this is actually in the language of the founding of the law and the evolution of the law, that crafty defense attorneys would use personnel records, particularly complaints about personnel, to try to discredit them at trial. Right? And so that was part of the narrative that 50A grew, and as it grew, it was interpreted by judges to basically mean that any complaint about one of those people that I just read out really couldn't be accessed under the Freedom of Information Law. Right? So, and just one more thing, because while we're here at the wake for 50A, this is it. We're in the wake. Our uncle is drunk in the corner, right? He's crying, and 50A is dead. And 50A not only had that provision, but it did have a provision where if you needed those records for something, you could seek a judicial order, right? So you could go to a judge, and you know, going to a judge is a lot harder than filing a FOIL request. We'll talk about FOIL requests in a little bit, but you could go to a judge and say, Judge, we really need this. We have the right recipe to get these records that we can't otherwise get. And then sometimes you could get them under a judicial order, a lot of times with some kind of restriction. So they were somewhat available, but it was costly. Right? So that is 50A, was 50A. It's dead, it's lying there on the floor, and it's been killed. And so what we've been talking about lately is the repeal of 50A. Yes. Right? Usually these days people are calling it repeal with like a capital R. Right? The repeal.
Yeah, and that leads into my next question. So explain what the repeal of 50A means, and more, I guess, necessarily how it is relevant to us in Buffalo.
Absolutely. All right, so the repeal of 50A for a lot of people just came like out of the clouds like a lightning bolt, right? We were, it happened, it was effective, this repeal was effective in June of 2020, which I know what you were doing in June of 2020, and probably a lot of people who are paying attention here, right? And so we were all focused on coming together to really strike some serious civic blows for racial equity, Black Lives Matter, and we were taking just deep, hard looks at how our cities and our suburbs are constructed and how they work. The repeal seemed to descend out of the sky like a lightning bolt, but actually it had been in committee for a long, long time. Okay. Because civil liberties groups, law enforcement groups, people who believe in transparency in government, all of those groups had come to the conclusion that whatever the intention was back in like 1976 when the law was passed, it had evolved into something that was really starting to, I guess from a very neutral perspective, you could simply say it was eroding trust in government, right? Because of all the secrecy. Yeah. For a lot of people who are actually taking a hard look at what's happening on the streets and in our cities, particularly, it's leading to people, it's leading to just unchecked abuses. Okay.
And I hear the terms 50A and qualified immunity used almost interchangeably. Now, is federal qualified immunity, from my understanding, is completely separate. This does not necessarily end qualified immunity, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, because that's one of the misconceptions going around, and I just want to make sure everybody understands that.
Okay, yeah, no, we're, right, we'll leave it at that for now.
Okay. All right, so I guess another question is, why are the police unions fighting so hard to keep 50A in place?
You're asking me to think like I'm in a police union, but I'm going to do the best I can.
Yeah, I'm sorry about the question. I'm not trying to.
I'm kidding. I've spent a lot of time going through the filings, both here in Buffalo. So, for anyone who's listening who doesn't know, here in the city of Buffalo, our police and our fire union have, because as you heard, they both of those kinds of officers were protected by 50A, have filed to bar the release of records that now are available. And we're going to talk about why they're available in a little bit. Okay. But why would we want to have a regime that hides those records? I think for a lot of my short take on why our police union here, or any police union, and particularly the police union in New York City, is they just want life to go back the way it was before June 2020. They had a sweet deal. Yeah. Right? And I mean that from a records management perspective. I've never been in law enforcement. I don't pretend to say that I know their job is easy or hard, right? But definitely there are well-documented problems with 50A. But it was working for the police unions. They liked it. They're fighting to keep it.
Okay. And one of the terms we heard used a lot for those of us that watched the court case anyways. So we heard that this 50A puts the police contract in conflict, right? So obviously we could assume law would supersede the contract, but what does that mean if the law makes the contract, if it's in breach of contract because of the law?
Right.
Is the whole contract nullified?
Well, so there's a couple presumptions in your question. I'm going to be
I'm sorry.
I'm going to be a smart ass to you and be like, what police contract? We don't have a police contract. It expired, right? Okay. Here in Buffalo. But that's a snide smart ass point. I'm sorry.
You're good.
So presuming you have a contract that's valid at the time and it has something in it that's rendered illegal, right? At that point, you really have to follow the law. You have to follow the law. And without putting too fine a point on it, the records that are now available, basically the identity of those records, the mystical legal formula you use to get them has changed somewhat. Okay. Right? And that's because of the Freedom of Information Law. Okay. So can I talk about what sprang into life after 50A was left dying on the floor?
Yeah, absolutely.
So 50A is done, right? We're RIP, and something new springs to life. And these are new sections of the Freedom of Information Law. Okay, really? So 50A, right? And what happens the same day that 50A is rendered invalid, right, by 50A, we welcome into our life here in the state of New York as part of the Public Officers Law, new sections to sections 86, 87, and 89 of the Freedom of Information Law. And what those things create, among many other things, is this new term called law enforcement disciplinary records.
Okay.
I know that is the least sexy argument or thing I've possibly ever said in my life, because it's boring, because we're talking about records management.
Yeah, but I think that's an important thing to look at when we're talking about law enforcement disciplinary records, because we employ these people. We pay them with our tax dollars. They are our employees. So I think it would be wise for one to assume if we pay them, we should have access to their records.
Well, I will say, first of all, broadly speaking, yes, right? And there's certain times, and the Freedom of Information Law has a lot of exceptions for when you can't get to a record, that even though we paid for it, right?
Okay.
So for instance, certain records pertaining to ongoing criminal investigations, I mean, we can understand why that might not be something you can access in the moment, because you could run the risk of compromising the criminal investigation. Now, under the criminal procedure law, you can actually, a defense attorney or a defendant can get some of that, but we're gonna leave that out there for now, right? Grand, things are happening in grand jury, right? We're not talking about that. But, so FOIL, Freedom of Information Law, which is part of the Public Officers Law, has always had some exceptions. But what we have now is this new category, and to your point, this new category is a type of record that, our tax dollars fund, and it is a category that encompasses the types of complaints people make about law enforcement officers, and it's the records of those proceedings. So if it wouldn't be too boring, I wouldn't mind hitting this definition just a tiny bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I promise, I won't make it too boring.
You're good.
A law enforcement disciplinary record, which is now a category of document defined under FOIL, meaning we can file a FOIL request and get it.
Okay.
Right? Consists of complaints, allegations, and charges against an employee, okay. Including a law enforcement officer, right? The name of the employee complained of or charged, the transcript of any disciplinary trial or hearing, including any exhibits introduced at such trial or hearing. They don't say whether or not what the outcome of the hearing is, right? So in other words, if there's a finding of responsibility or no responsibility, guilt or innocence, it doesn't matter, right? Under this definition, we can now get this. The disposition of any disciplinary proceeding, and the final written opinion or memorandum supporting the disposition and discipline imposed, right? So these are things that now exist as a category.
Okay.
That we can get.
So, and I guess the real question that everyone is definitely going to be wondering here. So, does the repeal of 58 make this information easy for us to get, or will there be a process of hoops to jump through, like there currently is for filing a FOIL request, as you know and I know?
Oh, Brandon. So you just pushed my nerd button. So one of the other things I do in my work is I do work with libraries and archives, right? And I'm passionate about records management, which once you get passionate about records management, you have about, I don't know, maybe 1,000 other people in the state of New York that you're friends with who get you. And then other than that, you're the weird person at the party talking about FOIL and cataloging, right? But, I've got some friends out there who understand. And some places, some towns, some cities, some agencies do a wonderful job keeping their records, which means we can do a simple Google search, right? So here's a great example, actually, that we have up on the board. Can people show people that?
Yep.
Right? Yep. So this is the New York State Court electronic filing system. And I have it called up to show the documents that kicked off the case we're starting, right? So this is this thing up here called a petition at the top, filed by Gilmore J, right? That is the petition that started the police union case here in Buffalo, right? And you can actually see they're asking for what's called an order to show cause. That includes the temporary restraining order,
okay,
which is the thing that means some of the records we can't get to right now, right? So to me, any type of document, unless it's filed under some kind of seal or protective order, right? If it's filed in a lawsuit here in New York, we can get to it. right? And it used to be you could get to it by walking down to the clerk's office and asking for a copy, right? And the clerk would look at you and be very grumpy. Here's the clerk, Mickey Kearns. It wouldn't be actually Mickey Kearns at the time, and it wouldn't be the clerk. It would be someone working in the clerk's office, but they would grumpily, charge you whatever, $1.25, make you a copy, and it would be laborious, right?
Okay.
Well, over the years we've evolved, and now all of this documentation is right here, and all of these are hyperlinks. And I don't want to sound like, it's exciting. It's a hyperlink. You open it and there's a document, but that's actually what happens. So anybody who's really curious about this, anyone can get guest access to this system. Right?
Okay.
So here I'll show the right. It's called New York State Unified Court System, right?
Okay, so New York State Unified Court System.
Yep.
Okay.
Electronic filing, and anyone can create a guest account to look up cases. If you can just
cool. Okay, I didn't know this myself.
Yeah, this is really, really cool, right? And so you can search. It's got a search function. Anybody who knows how to use Facebook, you can use this. You can search. If you can creep on your ex-girlfriend or boyfriend, you know how to use it, right? And all of this is available. So it used to be, if I wanted a document like this, I could have filed a request. I could go down to the clerk's office and get it, and that would have been legal. But now it's much easier to get the records. I don't even have to file a request. Right? Okay. And so there's a trend that it's not required by law, but in a lot of places, well, some use of the system is required, but we'll leave that aside. So some places are doing, they're getting like gold stars for records management. Okay. They're properly cataloging their records, and they're making it easy to find them, and you can just get to them. Okay. Right? Other places aren't doing so great. They charge money for documents that should be available to the public for free. Right? In my opinion, by the way, there's some debate on this. Right? Yeah. And then some places are still storing their documents, possibly in a basement, maybe near a puddle, possibly where the documents are getting moldy, and no one can find them. Right? Okay. So, it changes from town to town. But if you have one more second for the one last bit of nerdery, we'll just tell you about this exciting thing called the New York State Arts and Cultural Affairs Law. And that law, New York State Arts and Cultural Affairs Law, requires towns to keep their records because you and I pay for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you are the town clerk in a small little town, you can't just get the records and be like, oh, what do I do with these? Do I want to keep them? Do I toss them? By law, you have to hold on to them, and then there's these things called retention schedules that say how long you have to hold them. Right? Okay. So all this stuff is not arbitrary, is my point. And there should be less hoops to jump through. There's still going to be some hoops, but the hoops are getting narrower, right, smaller, and there's less of them, right? And there really shouldn't be too many at all. It should be easy to find the records that you and I pay for.
And I guess so the 50A repeal, would that be just misconduct while on the job, correct? So anything in their personal life, obviously, say they got arrested for DUI, would that be a place of public record included with their file? I guess is what I'm trying to
ask. So we're actually, so there's what happens by law, and then there's what actually happens out there in the real world. Yeah. Right? And so, my journeys in life have not brought me into the police records management world before, except for in the case of managing, criminal defense. Right? Yeah. Criminal defense. And so my impression is that there's times when allegations of police misconduct get investigated in internal affairs, and then there's a decision, right? Does this become, if what was complained of is potentially criminal conduct, right? Then it becomes a criminal matter. Okay. Right? And then it's prosecuted as a criminal matter. And that stage, that transition from an internal affairs investigation to a criminal matter, that's one of the data points. I think, probably everybody saw how many groups were sending documents to the judge to show how important this case is right now, right? That's one of the many points they're making. As a society, we want that data, we need that data to be able to see how effective is the complaint process. What happens, right? What happens to the many complaints that come in? How many of them are actually investigated? How many of them lead to a finding of responsibility or get referred over for some type of criminal prosecution? I don't know, right? And we're not really in a position here in Buffalo as a, our media and our people really aren't in a position to evaluate that because we don't have the data, we don't have records.
Yeah, and I can agree with that. I think it's, and this is more of an opinion, and so I'm not going to hold you to anything to this, but I feel like a big part of it is, everyone wants us to trust the police, but we can't trust them with their records kept secret because we don't know who's policing our streets. And I think it's an uncomfortable feeling when they can pull up anything on us in the database and we don't know anything about them. And I think that's part of the issue here.
Well, to me, you just used some really telling language there, us, them, right?
Yeah.
The whole point of having, well, not the whole point, but a big part of why we have a civilian police force, right? Why doesn't our military just police us? Right, which seems to be a notion, by the way, that our president can't quite wrap his brain around. But we're not going there tonight. Sorry. But the reason the military doesn't police us is the idea is that a citizenry polices itself.
Yes.
So the problem you're pointing out, right, starts with this us-them mentality. And it just plays out in so many subtle ways, right? So this, a lot of people talk about, well, we should really have return to a residency requirement, right? Why are people living in East Aurora?
And that's something I've talked about many times.
Right,
Absolutely.
and they're coming in here and policing people in Buffalo who they could think of as perhaps, as other, right? Us and them. And then they can drive 30 miles or 40 miles, whatever it is, right? And be away, right? And then come back. And anything that diminishes the us and them mentality strikes me as critical.
Okay. Yeah, and I feel like that, and that's something I think subtly is worked in that we don't realize in many different facets, not just citizens versus police. But I feel like that is part of the issue. We have officers who work in communities, who police communities that they've never actually lived in. Now, I feel like that would create some kind of disconnect, and I know I'm not here to ask you opinion questions and that, but so I guess I can't really ask the question I wanted to ask, because I don't really want to get too opinionated here.
Oh, well, fair enough. You can ask and I can refuse to answer it if you want.
But I guess, so the next court date is October 6th, correct? Now, is there anything we can specifically be looking out for that court date in October 6th?
It's really, really heartening to see people realizing the importance of these records. I think continuing to educate, for every person who's listening, if you take 5 minutes to show people and talk to them about, well, what is FOIL? What can we get? And to emphasize to them that the repeal of 50A and the changes to the Freedom of Information Law have really created a whole new scheme that as the people of the state of New York, we need to really be insisting we live up to, right?
Okay.
And, staying on our council members. So this case, that petition that's up there, was prompted by, and it's cited in the papers from the police and fire union, right? Was prompted because the Common Council of the City of Buffalo, which, by the way, I know they're taking a lot of knocks, and they should be. Okay, they should be. They've been asleep at the wheel. It's been status quo in Buffalo ever since I got here in the '90s, right?
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Right, city's waking up, and it's time, and a lot of people are getting called into account, right? But one of the things that happened as a result of the citizen, and I shouldn't say citizen, the people being active, because here in Buffalo, we are very blessed to have people who are active in our communities who aren't citizens yet, right? So, the demands of the people of the city to the council members saying, we want you to take a look at what's happening with our police, right? And so the Common Council said, okay, fine, we want these records. We want some records, right? We want to take a look at it. I think it was the last 5 years or something. And that was what inspired, in part, Because also some of the FOIL requests to different media outlets were starting to be honored as well, right? The city was starting to release some of these law enforcement disciplinary records. The Common Council asked for the records, and the suit was filed to stop the fulfillment of that request. So even though, like I said, Common Council that sounds violent. Sorry, I didn't mean it that way. They're taking a lot of knocks, right?
Yeah.
And some of them are well deserved. But it was because of people asking that the Common Council made the request, and that was the request that really triggered what's happening now, right? And so asking is important.
Yeah, and part of that is, I can't speak for everybody watching, or even you, but I could speak for myself. I have made numerous phone calls to Pridgeon, Rivera, Wingo. I've even gone so far as I've had multiple, probably 2 or 3 conversations with Byron Lockwood. And they don't go anywhere, right? So we don't see change, and it's all saving face. And then we see Mayor Byron Brown go and sign a law that seemingly doesn't change anything. It's just a dog and pony show. And I feel like that's a big part of this, and we're seeing it play out with the 50A proceedings as well. And whereas they want to keep us really isolated and not educated on what's going on within the community, because if we do, well, these people won't have jobs anymore. And by these people, I'm talking these council members that have been on council forever, that run unopposed constantly, that win with less than 600 votes. And a mayor that, basically relies on gaining everyone in the Democratic Party's vote in the city, because the city's mostly Democrat, but he hasn't done anything for us. We haven't seen the progress. So I guess the biggest thing is what is the belief that we will actually see anything come of this with 50A being repealed, given the fight that has already taken place? So to me, victory in this is every record that the City of Buffalo and the Buffalo Police Department now has that is a law enforcement disciplinary record, right? Whether it's in I don't know where they are. I don't know where they are, right? I don't know if they're in the basement, in a drawer. I don't know. Wherever they are, they need to be preserved. They need to be properly cataloged into some kind of system, and they need to be accessible to the people under the Freedom of Information Law, right? That doesn't mean we get everything, and definitely there is a provision to redact certain things, right? So there's some protections we're adding in. And I imagine, and that's something I think that would go without saying, sensitive information with any FOIL request is basically automatically redacted unless it's ruled. Is it relevant to the document itself, really? So it's mandatory in the new working of the law. So as of June 12th, cell phone number, family member name, certain other biographical data, right? That has to be redacted. Okay. And then there's some things that there's a little bit of discretion within the municipality. So here within the city, we could decide, do we want to redact this or not? Right? Okay. We get a little bit of decision making. And that's the kind of thing, by the way, when something is discretionary, that is the kind of thing I could see being something that's discussed at union negotiations. But to your earlier point, you don't sit down in a union negotiation and say, well, let's negotiate. Should we follow the law or not? Right? Yeah. You don't. Our rights are not a bargaining chip at the negotiating table, right? They are our rights. Our New York State legislature has confirmed them to us. Unfortunately, sometimes when there's a big sea change, and this is a change, this is a huge culture change, and it definitely is working. It's going to put a stop in the way things used to work, in the status quo that we've been dealing with here for so long, right? And can be sometimes painful and a little bit messy, right? Okay. So that mess is what we're seeing now. But we'll know that we have gotten real change when we can get the records and we can take a really good, long, hard look at what have complaints, really looked like. What clearance rate was happening with complaints? How were complaints being handled? Were they actually investigated?
How many complaints were lodged where there was no follow-up? How many, for that matter, just flip it, right? How many false complaints, right, have been lodged? We don't have that information either.
Yeah, and I feel that's something that would work in the officer's favor if they are doing their jobs correctly and these complaints are being filed falsely. I feel like that would work in the officer's favor, and they could say, hey, look, I'm wrongly being harassed, and I feel like an officer who's properly doing his job would certainly have no issues with his record being public. And I get that's an opinion, and maybe you can't weigh in on that at all.
But. I can't, but you know who can. So for people who watched the stream of court today, one of the parties that they did submit a brief, the judge did read it, and it's in the record. They didn't get admitted as an amicus, a friend of the court, amicus going forward, because only the 26 media organizations made it in for that. But they filed a brief, and this is the long list of documents that were filed in this case, and I think it's in the second page. Let me take a look. It's called the Law Enforcement Agency.
Wow, there's a lot of documents.
Yeah. Oh yeah, oh yeah. He had a lot of reading to do.
He definitely did.
He definitely had read it. So if we just take a look at the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. It's more me, more of the.
Sorry, guys. There's a lot of documents in here. 131.
In this massive array of documents is a wonderful brief filed by the Law Enforcement Agency Partnership, I believe, and they actually speak to exactly what you were just talking about. So that group was a group of law enforcement people, and they were actually involved they were one of the groups that spoke to the legislature, I believe, during the repeal, hearings and all of that. Before the law was repealed, they did a lot of studies, and they made exactly that point. Now, our police union disagreed with them, right, and has gone on the record, and their response to that brief is in here, right? So they basically said, well, you can say that, we don't agree with you, right? It's, free country, right?
Yeah.
So far. That's a really good brief, and I would encourage people. It was a really illuminating read for me, and it's got some really good citations and numbers, and for people who like to make sure they have facts to back up their opinions. It was a fantastic read, and just even though they didn't make it in as an amicus, meaning they're not going to be submitting anything going forward, right? Just the presence of that brief in this massive array, it really stands out. And I certainly read it, right? So, as one of the attorneys who's going to be moving forward in this thing, because my client, Jim Kistner, was allowed to actually join on as a party, I'll be reading and, paying attention to that.
Yeah, you'll definitely have your work cut out for you as I see all these documents. So I guess, is there any closing remarks that you definitely want people to know about 50A moving forward in the process that is to come? I mean, it's going to be a long process.
That was exactly what I was going to say. So I just want to say, first of all, I see everything that's happening in Buffalo and what's happening in Rochester and all across the country, right? It's a massive chessboard. And this thing, right, I feel like I'm getting to play, I'm privileged to represent someone in this and play this role. So this is my little corner, and I'm going to be trying to get to some of the street activity and some of the other stuff and really connect with people, right? But this is where I'm at. And to the people who are out there putting their bodies on the front lines, who are doing the research, who are participating in the citizens groups, don't get tired. We are in it, right? But it's just so much work. Don't get tired. Support each other, take care of your physical health, be ready. We're going to be, this fight is going to be happening this time next year.
And this is what people don't see. Like, everyone wants to pay attention to the protests going on. Nobody ever wants to pay attention to the behind the scenes work that goes on, because that's the change that actually impacts our day. Marching is great. I am one of the people that's out there all the time. Marching is great. But at some point, you need people to act do the boring work, let's call it.
Well, it's the unsexy work, right? But it's the devil's in the details.
Yeah.
And but it's if you think of it as a body, right? So we need the people we need the feet marching.
Oh yeah,
right?
Because that's what raises the awareness.
Absolutely.
However, when the awareness is raised, I think it's important to understand you need people out there fighting for it too. And I think that's where a lot of this gets lost, because there was a lot of people early on, telling me, specifically making the phone calls and sitting down with the police commissioner, it's not going to get you anywhere. But if we challenge these things in court, if we sit down and talk and we say, hey, look, if you guys aren't going to do your job, we'll put someone in there who will do the fucking job properly. I think that's the important thing. And that's why I think what you're doing is, even though it might not be at the front of everybody's minds, because quite honestly, that court case was hard to sit through at times. But these are things that are necessary to get done for us to see change, for everybody out there marching. These are the things that need to happen moving forward.
Yeah, I want to give you one more analogy. It's kind of like the people who are marching and bringing the ruckus and getting out there. If you picture we're in a blacksmith, right? You're the fire.
Okay.
Right? They're the fire, and then but you need the metal, and then you need the boring, like pound,
Yeah.
right? So I'm like, I feel like I've got the pound, the hammer.
I like how you automatically
right?
go to a blacksmithing analogy where most people would never go in the first place. Because I worked in bars my whole life, so I'm in my head I already had a bar analogy.
Well, yeah. I mean, well, I am not, full disclosure, I am not a blacksmith, but I've known several fine blacksmiths. I am a sword fighter, right? But that's it. At the end, we're going to get something that's a product that's, crafted from that heat and the metal and the labor, and it all has to come together, right? So for people if you're getting frustrated, if you're getting tired, take the time to take care of yourself, but stay in it. This is the hard part, right? This is the hard part, and we gotta keep in touch, be understanding of each other, and just go.
Well, and I think that is some of the worry here, as we're approaching winter, and you know how winter in Buffalo can be. And as much as I love the snow, many people do not. So, and I think that's the worry here, is we're going to lose steam going into the winter, which is why I think these court cases are all the more important. While they're not exciting to listen to, and they're not necessarily even exciting to watch, it's important we pay attention, and we need to drill that into people's heads as much as we can.
Yeah. Well, and if you can find a way to make it fun, right? Like, so, I don't know, turn it into a board game, do brackets, right? Which council member is going to have to
turn it into
first,
a smoking game,
right?
Something.
So it's, whatever lights your fire here, because this is the work, and it's laborious. And with winter coming, that's a good point.
Yeah, and that is the perfect time with winter coming up for people, especially community leaders and organizers. You guys need to be sitting down and saying, look, we did all the marching. We're not going to be able to do the marching when it's -5 degrees out for a month straight. So what we need to do is we need to sit down, and what changes do we want? How can we write this legislation? And most importantly, what lawyers can we sit down with to get the wording right? Because wording is everything. Language is everything when we're talking about this stuff, as you noted when we were talking earlier.
Yes, it's important. But the leadership that we see out there, I think of Miles and Mercedes, and just definitely India, and everybody who's coming out. It is so inspiring, and I just want them to know, we're there, and there's so many people just uniting.
Oh yeah, and even the young kids in the Liberation Collective, while I feel like they might lack some general knowledge on this stuff, and it's not a slight to them, it's just who the hell does have the knowledge on this stuff besides nerds like us, But it's important for them to sit down and because they're the young group right now, and they have grown up immensely over the summer. I've been very impressed with the latest things and latest events done by the Liberation Collective. And I think it's important that we get the young people involved too, not just the older activists. but for say, I'm 25. We need to get more people around my age involved. And how do we make this fun for young people? You know, seriously.
Well, it's been great to see people coming into their power, right? And realizing that what they do, you know, to go back to I'm going back to the blacksmith forge for 1 second. You know, they're the fire. Yeah. You don't have the fire. If you don't have fire in the belly, you're just going to have something cold at the end, right? So it's a continuum. We got to stay connected. And I think, how do you make it fun? I mean, you've got to make sure everybody who's doing their bit feels empowered to do their bit, right? And they need to be learning. You know, we all need to be learning. I'm learning. I spent a lot of the summer really intentionally listening, right? And just trying to absorb, especially from people who have different life experience than me. And I just wanted to listen, and it was amazing, right? So,
yeah, and that's one of the things I feel I took away from this summer. You know, I guess I had a little bit different of an upbringing because my dad's a CEO, and he's also retired military, and I lived the early years of my life on naval base. So some of these struggles, you know, are something I never had to endure. So when you're sitting there and you're listening to people that have come from such different walks of life to you, it really resonates differently, even so much so as seeing on a camera versus being there in person. I feel like it. I feel very lucky to have been there for a lot of us, but also we've seen a lot of these young activists. Miles Carter, even though he's not ultra young, I would still say he's a young guy. And we've seen Miles goes from a guy doing a news interview to now one of the faces of Black Lives Matter in Buffalo. And he grew up, and he had to grow up into that role. And to a similar extent, I feel I had to grow up into a role that I wasn't necessarily ready for when it happened. You know, because, you know, first thing you know, you have 50 people watching your stream, you have 160 people on my Facebook, which was my situation, and then I have 40,000 people watching it. And I feel like for a lot of us, it's been a growing process, and it hasn't always been clean for all of us, but you said people coming into their power, and I think it's not really coming into their power, it's realizing how powerful we can be if we're given that platform. And we are just the people that have been lucky enough to be given a platform based on what we have done. But everybody out there has come to their power. So it's not necessarily just the people that are getting the attention, right? It's everybody that's showing up.
Yeah. And if a community can produce good leaders, right? And leaders who can learn on the fly, leaders who step up.
And we've had leaders show up, and to some extent, I consider you a leader because I watch your videos on Facebook. You know, as I know a lot of people watch my videos, and it's one of those things where like we're all learning from each other. I watch you, I watch Blue Raven. We all watch and learn from each other, and it's funny because we're all in such all three of us, using us three as the example because we all stream. We're all in such different points in our life, and we're all so different at what we do, and yet we can all listen to each other. We can step up when we need to take charge, and we can also have civil conversation even though we don't agree on everything. And these are things people need to learn, and I hope it's something we can take away from the summer where this isn't just going to be a this summer thing where we're sitting down and saying, you know, we're just listening. We need to continue to listen to those who have not been listened to in the past, and to those who a system has, for lack of a better term, screwed. And you know, and I think for us, I mean, I could be wrong, but me and you are both white. I mean, I'm half white, but my skin color, I give it an inherent privilege because of my skin color. And I think for a lot of people, they don't want to admit that. And it's not us saying your life is easy. And I think that's one of the things I didn't understand early in my life. It's not people telling me my life has been easy. It's just people saying, hey, look, like, yeah, your life might have been hard, but it would have been way worse if you were black and every time you went into a store, you had someone watching over you, or you had the cops watching you every second they passed you by.
Yeah. No, and I came to a point where I realized that being who I am at this point in time in this country, in this city, means whether I want to or not, part of my role is being a dismantler, right? And there's sort of a grief of saying, wow, I'd like to just be a builder. And it's my responsibility to be a to look around and say, okay, this system that I have benefited from, as you point out, unfairly.
Yes.
It's an unfair system. And do I want to contribute to the continuity of that system? Or do I want to say no? Do I want to be the Empire, or do I want to be the Rebel Alliance?
Yeah.
Right? Which one is it? Darth Vader or Luke Skywalker?
I think George said something good here. So George says, I refer to it as stepping up. Sometimes the situation forces you to find something within yourself that you didn't know was there. And I think that's completely right, George. Sometimes the situations dictate how we have to respond, right? When I pulled out my phone, I didn't know I was going to have that many people watching it. I was just trying to show people on my Facebook, like, hey, there's no news here. The police are setting up. And at that time, when I first went live at 3:30, there was 60 protesters roughly. I didn't know it was going to turn into thousands of people. You know, these are things that are unforeseen. But yeah, I think, George, you bring up a good point. Sometimes the situation we're in forces us to step up. And I think you being a lawyer, and you realize you're in a position where you can fight the fight from, lack of a better term, the inside and within the system. And I think that's really cool that you have used your position and your privilege to do that, because let's be honest, there's a lot more money doing other things than law. I mean,
yes, my husband points that out all the time. There will be no billboards with my face on them anytime soon.
Yeah, and that's an admirable thing. It's not always about the money. And I think that's something, as a society today that's built around consumerism, that sometimes we need to take a step back and say, you know, we wouldn't be able to have this society if there wasn't that oppressed class. And throughout history, there's always been an oppressed class. Now, we see it in the United States as, and this is now way off topic from 50A, and it's been a good conversation.
Oh, we're done with it. I'm closing the 58.
But, you know, what really we see now is prisoners have become this oppressed class because we rely on them for cheap labor. In New York State, for instance, we use them to produce hand sanitizer during the COVID-19 pandemic that they could not use because it's contraband. And that's one of the things with Black Lives Matter as well. It's not just about the police brutality. It's about an entire system that has let people down. An entire legal system. It's not just the police beating people. It's not just unfairly proportioned bails, which we know is a thing. It's an entire system that seemingly works together, and a lot of people say it's not working properly, and a lot of other people would say to that argument, well, it's working the way it was intended. It was never intended to protect us. It was intended to oppress us.
Well, yeah, and I want to say, I think a lot of professions, right, in the state of New York, which is like a licensed profession, like I'm a licensed attorney, there are licensed architects. I think a lot of professions are starting to take deep looks into the complicity of their profession. Certainly lawyers, right? Lawyers have to take a deep look and say, okay, you know, how many times have I walked into a courtroom, looked around, and every judge, every lawyer is white, right? And everybody walking in handcuffs is black, right? And how can you not? That was a moment for me when I first started doing criminal work.
Actually, George, you bring up a great point, and we forgot one of the very big figures here. And I just want to say this to George's point. Juan Santos. Man, has he stepped up big time. You know, and what he said in a BFO interview today was, I cannot afford to be afraid. And George, I think he's right. And that goes for all of us. And all of us who are streaming, all of us who are fighting, because we know there can be backlash, right? You realize in your legal profession, you're doing these videos on your Facebook. I'm sure you realize within your professional career, there possibly could be backlash for this.
Yeah.
I mean, it comes with the territory. I have a family that works for the city of Buffalo and is police or was police, and you realize there's going to be backlash for this. And at some point, whereas Juan's been arrested a handful of times, and I don't know what your personal experiences have been, but I think that is one of the things that we just kind of have to accept. And for people like me and you, it doesn't seem to be an issue with us, right? We don't mind putting ourselves out there. But for a lot of other people, it's a scary thing. You don't necessarily have to be out there with a camera in your hand or be out there, on Facebook saying, fuck the police and going after police officers, right? You don't have to be that person. Making a difference, it's good enough just to show up every once in a while, right? Or to donate to people's bail funds, like when Juan got arrested. And so stepping up and not being afraid is one thing. But it's a whole other, it's okay to be afraid, I want to say. And it's okay to not be out there on the front lines. I just want to make that clear for some of the people that could be watching, because, well, yes, there's many different fronts that this fight is being fought on, right? You're in the courtroom. There's people in the streets. There's other people in meetings trying to draft legislation and push it through on their local governments, right? And at some point, we have to stop fighting amongst each other like we do, and I'm guilty of it. And we all kind of have to come together and realize we're all fighting for the same thing. Let's get on the same page. And we might not want 100% of the same thing, and that's okay. But there comes a point where we have to say, all right, this is the number one thing. Get that done. And then we move on to the next issue. So yeah, don't be afraid. And if you are afraid, it's okay, guys. But the number one thing is you're in the fight somehow, right? You don't have to be in the courtroom like Stephanie. You don't have to be on Facebook all day. And you sure as hell don't have to put yourself in danger when protests get dangerous if you don't feel you should be doing that. Especially if you have kids, you should, And these are things that it's okay for us to keep fighting this fight. There's going to be a backlash. And Juan is a great example of that. That dude was taking pepper balls and everything. And Juan's got balls of steel. I give him a lot of credit, George. He has been one of the leaders that have stepped up big time. And there's way too many to name. I can't even name all of the leaders we have had. And Heidi makes another good point here too. We do. We all have different skills to contribute. And I think that's true. And I think part of that is finding your skill set and working within that skill set. You're obviously a lawyer, so your skill set's a little different than ours, is in law better than I probably ever will, let's be honest.
You just have to read a lot.
And I think this is a good point to end, because now I'm just ranting, and I like to rant, but now there's somebody else with me while I'm ranting. All right, guys, we're going to end the live here, and thank you, Steph, for joining me, and thank you guys who have watched. I know this isn't the most exciting live ever, but this was something that had to be talked about, and I will see you guys later. As always, I love all of you, and we'll see you tomorrow.